This is Beyond the Resume, the podcast that brings you the stories, advice, and insights behind some of the most successful people in real estate. Beyond the Resume is brought to you by Jackson Lucas Executive Search, the industry leader in human capital solutions. Here is Chris Papa and Lisa Flicker.
Dara McQuillan, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for being here on Beyond the Resume. It's great to see you.
It's a pleasure being here, Lisa. It's lovely to see you again. And it was also lovely to see you the other week. So thank you for the invitation.
I know. I always love seeing you. Your energy is so wonderful. And, it's interesting because this podcast, the target audience is students and young folks looking to create a career in real estate. And I often hear from 22-year-olds, it's too late, I can't do that. And I look at your resume and I feel like you are proof there is no straight line into this. You're like kind of in a lot of ways like the anti-resume where you've really built a background and then no one could have predicted you'd be spending 2 decades marketing skyscrapers. But I feel like that unconventional path is your asset. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your early career, kind of how you got started. I think you were at the UN for a while, and just what young Dara was like and what he wanted to be when he grew up.
So thank you for asking. It's definitely been a curious path. The work that I do now is incredibly interesting and diverse. And, the projects that I work on are, large and complicated, whether it's the rebuilding of the World Trade Center or placemaking in downtown LA or whatever it is. And I very much came into the world of real estate by accident. Didn't know anything about it, wasn't from it. I grew up in Europe. For the first 14 years, I lived in Ireland, where my family is from. And then when I was a teenager, my father moved us to Belgium because he wanted us to grow up with a European sensibility, learn a couple of languages, be able to jump in a car and drive to Paris or Amsterdam, and it was just a really cool thing for a young family to experience. And then, of course, I disappointed them all by coming to America, where, I get to use my languages when I'm ordering meals in Italian restaurants, but that's about it. No, I actually ended up getting a scholarship to study at UCLA for a year. And while I was there, I decided, wouldn't it be fun to work here? I'm here for this year. Let's make the most out of it. This was back in the 1990s, and I didn't have a computer or a typewriter. So I resorted to handwriting my resume. And luckily I have good handwriting, but still, like, who handwrites a resume?
Right.
You know what I mean? But I did it really nicely with all the white spacing and, the bold letters. It looked kind of like what it would look like on paper. And then I sent it out to a whole bunch of different companies, that I'd heard of, but didn't know a lot about. And to my surprise, I got a call from editor's assistant at Variety, the entertainment newspaper. And young guy was very professional, and he said, Mr. McQuillan, we've received your resume and we'd like to invite you in for a possible internship. And I was like, wow, that's fantastic. I'd love to meet you. Should I come to the office? And he said, no, we'll meet in a restaurant. And, he's thinking this could be the Unabomber who sent in this handwritten resume because they'd never seen anything. And they were so curious. They were like, we got to meet this guy, but we're not meeting him here. So you go take him to a restaurant down the road and see if he's all right.
And
that was the sort of start of my career. I ended up working there as their first ever intern. And it was a blast living in a place like LA and working for a newspaper in the entertainment industry. It was just an amazing way to learn about that business, but also, not be taken too seriously and also enjoy the city. So the early start of my career started there in entertainment. And to a lot of extents, I'm still working in entertainment. I mean, you and I, we talk about this all the time. What we all do is storytelling. We're telling stories about ourselves and our colleagues, our work, our companies, our clients, our customers. I mean, that's what we all do. So, I think that's why I'm always drawn to the world of entertainment, is because of the storytelling. And it's just as relevant in the world of real estate as it is anywhere else.
Well, I feel like you have the greatest backdrop to storytell. And, I know your team was very involved with construction, marketing, leasing, all, I think it's 3, 4, and 7 World Trade Center. Obviously, there's a big story there. Everything from like Larry Silverstein buying it and then not that long after, terrible things happening. Tell us the story, because it's just too good to not hear.
I mean, I think there's a number of ways you can experience the story of how the World Trade Center got rebuilt, and one of the favorite parts of my job is, it's bringing together almost like an orchestra of people to do that. It starts with Larry Silverstein. When Larry Silverstein was 70 years old when he purchased the Twin Towers, this was his lifelong ambition as a real estate developer and builder and owner, only to see the entire complex destroyed 7 weeks later on 9/11. So Larry's story and his commitment to rebuild the World Trade Center after 9/11, that vow, that promise that he made, is really center to a lot of what we've done at the World Trade Center, whether it's through our digital and social media, our marketing, our sort of leasing activities. It really started with him. He made a vow to rebuild, and that's what he did, building by building by building. I don't know if I ever told you the story of how or when I first met Larry Silverstein. It was an interesting moment that actually spoke a lot about who he is as a person. I had been working in the film business for a couple of years as a story editor, and I got married, had a couple of kids, and needed to earn a real living. So I moved into public relations. And my sort of dream was to somehow maybe work at a movie studio, or an entertainment organization, and help them tell their stories. So I met with a lot of senior people who represented, Disney and Fox and Sony and News Corp, and, they did their communications and marketing and branding. And they all said the same thing. They said, look, you could come and work with me for 10 or 15 years and then maybe get promoted to be my number 2 person. And then when I retire 10 years after that, maybe you could run the department if you're willing to do that. Or you could, go and work in an industry you don't know a lot about, where there's a need for somebody like you, a writer, a storyteller, and sort of see where it goes and, roll the dice. So, I said, that definitely sounds like a much more interesting idea. And one of those guys, a guy called Gary Ginsberg, who worked at Time Warner at the time, he was also the founder of George magazine. He referred me to Larry Silverstein and Larry's right-hand guy, Jano Lieber, who's now the chair of the MTA. And, Larry invited me in, and then all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I better find out about this guy. So I did my research and I Googled Larry and I looked him up, and I quickly realized, his story and his commitment to rebuild, and this massive, complicated, very, very controversial, very bureaucratic, dramatic project he was just about to get started with. So I went into his offices and he gave me a friendly welcome. And before we even began, I said, Mr. Silverstein, I know you're incredibly busy. This is an incredible project that you're undertaking. And I don't want to slow you down, but I just want to be honest with you. I don't really know a lot about what you do. I don't know real estate. I don't know architecture or engineering. These are all of the things that, are in your DNA, but they're not familiar to me, and I don't want to waste your time. And, Larry, he's a very cool customer. He sort of stepped back and looked at me in the eye, and he said, your name is Dara, right? And I said, yeah. He said, and you're Irish? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I presume you can tell a story then. And I said, I can definitely do that. And he said, well, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for storytellers, people who can tell the story of what we are doing here. It's really complicated and it's taking a long time. And even more important, tell a story of what this place is going to be 10 years from now. It's going to be something totally different. So that's what I need you to do. And don't worry about the other stuff. You'll learn architecture from the best architects in the world, because those are the people we're hiring for this project. Same thing with the engineers and the finance people and the legal people, all of that stuff. So, I'm grateful he took a chance on me. And yeah, I picked up a little bit here and there from all of the professionals. But at the end of the day, he was absolutely right. Everything that we do is communicating a vision and, telling the story of how we're going to get from A to Z, and, getting people excited about the work that they do and feel passionate about the mission of whatever it is that they're doing. And that's what we've been doing together for the last, 2 decades. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, I'm sure it's been interesting. And Larry is such a visionary to think beyond. Let me bring in somebody who knows real estate branding, because, you really had to brand the unbrandable, which is a big job to have. I mean, when I look at it, I think you had to tell a story about grief, resilience, ambition, all simultaneous, like, the story of New York. It's like a masterclass in communications. What's kind of the main theme that you've woven through that? Because I know I've heard it, but it's just great.
I mean, you touched on a couple of really interesting points. The story evolved obviously over the years. In the years after 9/11, Larry vowed to rebuild, but he knew it would take a long time to figure out the politics, the financing, the commemorative aspect of the project, the master planning, the architecture, the construction. There was a lot of components to it. And in the beginning, he just wanted to do something positive in Lower Manhattan. So he committed to building 7 World Trade Center. It was the last building to fall on 9/11, but the first to rise. And he did it despite having no companies in the building. There were no tenants. He was building a $1.7 million spec building. And a lot of people thought he was crazy. They thought that downtown was finished as a business district, that no one would ever work in a World Trade Center tower again. There was a moment after 9/11 when New Yorkers were, reconsidering living in tall buildings. And we are a city of tall buildings. That's what we do. But, people had, serious doubts. And there were a lot of doubts about the future of downtown Manhattan as a neighborhood. This was a neighborhood that had been already in transformation since the 1930s, when companies like banks and newspapers and ad agencies moved to Midtown, because the people who worked for those companies commuted in to Grand Central or Times Square or Penn Station, mostly from the suburbs. So the whole neighborhood had already been in transition, and now suddenly you have 15 million square feet of office space completely destroyed in the worst terrorist attack in American history. And this guy's building an office building and hoping to bring companies back in and have them excited about at this place. I mean, it was an astonishingly difficult job. In fact, one of the marketing folks that we met with early on to help us think about placemaking and how to make that transition, he said, what you guys are trying to do is turn 3 Mile Island into Club Med. And, he just basically threw up his hands and said, I don't know how you're going to do it. But what Larry did was, it was interesting, but the good thing is he did bring in the best people in the business. He brought in David Childs, an architect from Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, to design the building. He brought in, Jamie Carpenter, an artist, to help design the base of the building, and another artist, Jenny Holzer, to design a security wall in the lobby that doubles as an art installation. And he brought in an amazing landscape architect, Ken Smith. I mean, he really reached out to everyone he could think of that would do the best job possible, because he knew that this building and how we positioned it, how we spoke about it, how we marketed it would really, sort of make or break the rest of the World Trade Center from a commercial perspective. And, the most important thing that he did was he built a really beautiful building. It's our headquarters. We were the first people to move in, back in 2006. We were a little lonely. We had a floor to ourselves and there was nobody else in the building. But it filled up very, very quickly after that and became an incredible architectural and commercial success. But it was really, bringing together all of these experts in their own field and creating something fantastic that really started the whole rebuilding effort at the World Trade Center. And that was really all Larry from start to finish.
And I love that when you took us through the museum there, I can't remember who it was, somebody gave him a skateboard so that he could skateboard back and forth to work. Right? We'll put that in the museum for now.
That's exactly right. He actually, one of the first companies to move into 7 World Trade Center was Moody's, the ratings agency. They were just a couple of blocks away in a building on Church Street. So moving down to Greenwich Street wasn't a neighborhood shift. And they got to move from a 50 or 60-year-old building into a brand new state-of-the-art, LEED gold, spectacular office building. And they'd lived through 9/11. They knew, they committed to downtown. They didn't want to leave the neighborhood. And when they moved out of their own building, Larry called up the CEO, a guy called Ray McDaniels, and he said, hey, Ray, congratulations on your move to 7 World Trade Center. We're thrilled to have you here. You're going to love it. This is an amazing building. You can't believe what we're going to do to rebuild the Trade Center. By the way, what are you doing with your old building? And, Ray McDaniel said, Larry, we're moving out because it's obsolete as an office building. Not really planning on doing anything. So Larry bought it, demolished it, and then built downtown's first Four Seasons hotel with, luxury condominiums on the top. designed by, Robert Stern, who done such a spectacular job at 15 Central Park West and has designed, incredible buildings all over New York. And anyway, the building was a huge success. The hotel opened, and Larry and his wife Clara moved from Park Avenue and 60th Street, where they'd lived for years, to Lower Manhattan. So as a housewarming gift, the employees did give him a skateboard with a rendering of the World Trade Center on the back. And we said, you've got the shortest commute of anyone we know. You're a block and a half downhill from your home to the office. So here you go. And of course, when our risk manager saw it, she freaked out and said, "Please promise me you'll never use it." So it actually, one of them hangs in his office and the other hangs up on that museum that we visited at 3 World Trade Center.
Well, it's interesting because I think a lot of owners, operators, developers, and students don't realize that marketing plays such a big role in real estate. And when I think about it, I think years ago there was like kind of, if we build it, they will come. And now the PR, the media, the average, all of this stuff is such a big part of the business of being in real estate. And it's interesting to me because you have a big job. You're on the management committee. You're kind of a part. You're not like a little side function that kind of does the marketing. You are like a core leader in the business. And so I'd love for you to just talk a little bit. If somebody was interested in building a career like yours, what is some of the advice you would give? And maybe talk a little bit about what you do so that some of the students and different people can get an idea of what that really means.
Of course, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of emphasis on marketing and storytelling in real estate because you're selling something that doesn't exist yet to many people. And in certain cases, you're also educating people. It could be to the neighborhood, which might be new to them, to the type of building that might be new to them, to a different type of space. And most important, you're selling a possibility and you're trying to, help people imagine what their life could be like within the 4 walls of a space that doesn't exist yet. So it's a tricky one. And there's a lot of very sophisticated tools that we can use. You've got renderings and models and animations, films, 3D videos, Matterports. There's obviously a lot of new AI ways to make those tools quicker and more efficient. And then there's things like long form storytelling, such as filmmaking and time-lapse photography. There's events and art. There's a lot of things that we can do to tell that story. And it really depends on the project and the company that you work for. And, some companies, their business model is fairly straightforward. I'm going to build an apartment building in a part of the city that has a real need for it. It's rental housing. I'm going to do a little bit of advertising. And, my apartments are going to rent up pretty well and I'm going to do just fine. And that's fantastic. It works for them. And then you have other projects that are much more complicated. Maybe they're really luxurious projects like a Nobu Residences and Hotel, for example, or a Four Seasons Hotel and Residences where you're selling the most expensive apartments in that neighborhood or in that city. And that's a much more sophisticated way of selling. And then you've got the whole world of office space, which is everything from brand new state-of-the-art skyscrapers in amazing locations that pretty much sell themselves, but get record rents to, buildings that are a little older and a little tougher to market, particularly post-pandemic, and that need a little bit of care and attention. So, there's a lot of different types of ways to do it. I think what sets us apart at Silverstein and one of the great pleasures of my job is that we had to be really, really creative in our marketing because of the sort of the level of the challenges that we faced on our different projects, number one. And in many cases, we have limited resources, right? It's still commercial or residential real estate. We're not selling consumer products. We're not selling, luxury goods. We're selling something very particular. But I've had a lot of fun over the years working with incredibly creative art directors and designers and filmmakers, photographers, event planners. I think it's my favorite part of the job is that I get to work with all of these incredibly creative people. And we have a business problem to solve. How to sell space, how to lease space, how to change a neighborhood, how to change a conversation. And weaving all of those things together has been a huge amount of fun. And also the latitude that Larry Silverstein and his family has given me and my team to be incredibly creative and to do things that, frankly, I haven't seen a lot of other real estate people do. And that's been an amazing pleasure and a little bit of a challenge at the same time.
Well, it's always interesting when I have conversations with the peers of Larry Silverstein who are looking at their real estate companies, and you're kind of the gold standard of going kind of from communications to strategic partner. And it is really, I said it, visionary of Larry Silverstein to be able to say, you know what, I'm going to take this marketing person and put him at the center of what I'm doing. It's so interesting to me. And I think that when young folks talk to me about their careers and they're communications major, marketing major, that's the dream. That's what they want to do. And so do you think it was just your great storytelling that convinced, like, how does somebody go from maybe a traditional role in marketing to be able to have a seat at the table like you do?
I mean, for me, it was trying things that hadn't really been done before and hoping for the best. Sometimes there was no real business objective or goal. It just sounded like a good idea at the time. And, having the support of the Silverstein family obviously made a huge difference. And I'll give you a couple of examples. Early on, when 7 World Trade Center was about to open, I bumped into a local Tribeca artist at a community board meeting. And this guy, Todd Stone, came up to me and he said, "Hey, I understand you're the PR guy for Silverstein. I live in Tribeca, and for the last 4 years, I've been watching your building go up, and I've been painting it from my apartment. Would you be interested in seeing my paintings?" And I was like, wow, that sounds really cool. Sure. So, a couple of days later, I went and visited Todd in his beautiful Tribeca loft studio and saw all of these incredible paintings that he'd done of our building going up. And, a thought occurred to me, and that was like, hey, would you be interested in painting in the building as opposed to painting the building? And, he said, wow, that sounds really interesting. Could I? And I was like, I don't know. I got to ask Larry Silverstein, but I don't see why not. And Todd came up and he started painting on one of the empty floors at 7 World Trade Center. And, he's a landscape painter, but he paints cityscapes. So he was immediately drawn to the cranes and the concrete trucks and the rebar and all of the sort of process of rebuilding the trade center, and started painting that. And then, a couple of months later, I bumped into another guy, this time a filmmaker, a guy called Marcus Robinson from Ireland, like me. And Marcus said, hey, listen, I've just spent the last couple of years doing a time-lapse film of the London Eye, which is a giant Ferris wheel that they have in London. And I'd love to give you a book about it. And, if you're interested in photographing and filming, a time-lapse about the Trade Center, I'd love to talk. And I said, let's talk right now. That sounds fantastic. So Marcus ended up moving in and joining Todd on this empty floor, while we were, finishing up the building. And then, they were joined by 2 other fine artists, a woman called Jacqueline Gorevich and another artist called Diana Horowitz. And each of these 4 artists just came and went. Sometimes it was once a week, sometimes it was once a month, sometimes it was every day, and started painting and documenting what they saw out the window. And 20 years later, they're still here. They've bounced from one building to the other, as we leased it and then finished it and then moved to another building. But as a result of that, we have this incredible body of work of paintings that tell the entire 20-year trajectory of the rebuilding of the World Trade Center. And all of this work belongs to them. It's their art. They did it. They sell it. That's how they pay their rent. They're working artists. But just by opening the door and allowing them to come in and witness what we were doing, we created this incredible visual archive of the project. And none of that would have happened if I hadn't bumped into him, and if Larry hadn't said sure, and if we hadn't an empty floor for them to work on. And it was just serendipity, that had happened in the first place. So a lot of our sort of storytelling and a lot of our, marketing efforts started out a little like that, and then ended up being incredibly useful to us, because now each of these artists has a book or a studio, a gallery, a space. The work is museum quality, and it's all positive and uplifting, and it tells our story of what we've done here. And that's just one piece of it. So it was really a lot of that I think made the difference, and it helped the leasing brokers lease the space. The financing folks finance the space. It helped the development folks develop new buildings. I mean, it all played a part, but it was in very different and unusual ways.
Wow. And, it's interesting because you have, so you've been kind enough to donate your space, and you and some of your other senior executives. And every year we do this education, teaching students what it's like to be in the real estate industry, teaching them what is it like to be development, construction, marketing, HR, and all of the different acquisitions, all the different roles. And what's interesting to me was this past year when we were there were so many, let's call it like 18 to 21-year-olds, and they walked through the building with pure joy because none of them were born, or, if they were barely born to really experience September 11th. So I think the ability to take something that was heavy and really create, like, I feel like the art piece of that was probably a tremendous part of that. So, I give you a lot of kudos because as we walk through the space, it's joyous.
Well, thank you. We love hosting students. I loved the event we did with you and your colleagues and all of those young people last summer, and look forward to doing it again. I think we're lucky in that we have these very unusual spaces at the top of our 3 World Trade Center skyscraper that tell the visual story of everything that's going on, whether it's the transformation of downtown Manhattan from a 9 to 5 business district to a mixed use 24/7 community, to the construction of each of the individual buildings, to the art program that takes place within the buildings. And it is fun when people step off the elevator after going all the way up to the top, and then they take it all in, because to really understand real estate you have to be there. I mean, that's I fundamentally believe that. And there doesn't have to be much there, but you got to be there to sort of feel it and experience it. And it's kind of cool to take, that ride up to the top and to see the entire city of New York in front of you, and to be in a space that, wow, I see how this was made. I see what they did to attract people here. And, I see all of the weird and unusual things they did here in order to, change people's minds about this place. So yeah, it's always a lot of fun. And I think when younger people come in and they see all of those different facets, whether it's art or hospitality or technology, sustainability, it sort of opens, their eyes to, wow, I didn't realize that in the world of real estate, there's any number of jobs in any number of industries. And whatever I'm passionate about, I bet I could find a place where my passion applies here. No matter who you are, no matter what you do. You could be a mathematician, an architect, an accountant. You could be a painter, a writer. You could be a human resources executive. You could be a strategist, a finance person. I mean, the world of real estate really does have all of that. And now, as we start to weave in, a lot more of technology and AI and quantum computing and all of that stuff, and improve and upgrade our systems across the board, there's a huge amount of technology jobs and forward-looking jobs, in our world. And I think it's very exciting to work for an organization that not only encourages and embraces that, but actually allows us to, to come up with these sort of crazy ideas and do them. We have a woman, Yael Ron, who joined us a number of years ago, and her entire background was managing Ritz-Carlton hotels around the world. And the world of hotel management is its own thing, as I'm sure you know, in every respect. And unless you've worked in a hotel or in that type of environment, it's really difficult to understand this is a world unto itself. Anyway, we hired her as our director of hospitality, and she brought in a team of people in each of our buildings, and they are the ambassadors, the representatives, the entertainment programmers, the amenity managers. They oversee life in the building, and she oversees them from this very high level luxury perspective. So for me, it's awesome to work with this woman. Where else would I get a chance to work with somebody who's got that level of experience unless I actually worked for a hotel company? Same thing with our technology team. We brought people in who have backgrounds in education and innovation and app development, not real estate at all. And they're bringing the sort of the best knowledge that they have, and all of the ideas that are coming from those industries, and bringing them into our world. And, again, for me, it's like I get to learn all of this stuff that otherwise I would know nothing about. But I also get to sort of weave in the work that I do in marketing and media and storytelling to help them tell the story of what they're trying to do. So it's very cool, and it's a lot of fun. And it really does, for young people, there's a million different opportunities in this world if you're drawn to that.
And it must have been, you've been there for about 20 years now, right? You've been there for a
Yes.
long time. So, it's hard to believe that was so long ago, but it's, we're in this interesting moment in time in the world where technology and AI and all of these things actually are a part of the real estate. It's not just like a nice to have extra. It really is a part of it. And so you've been there for over 20 years. How do you, it's very rare that somebody stays so loyal to an owner and a property for so long. But because of that, you've probably seen more than just kind of chasing the next deal. What have you watched evolve in technology or AI that you think might just be interesting for students who are looking at like, what do I add to my repertoire?
It's interesting. I taught a class for a couple of years at Baruch, and the very first class in my program, even though it was real estate marketing, was students had to write their own biography. And it's interesting, nobody outside of, like, I guess, professionals have a biography. It's just not something you do, I guess, until you have a couple of jobs under your belt. And, I would sort of go through my biography and get to the point they would all ask me, so how long have you been at Silverstein Properties? And I was like, 20 years. And then they would like, excuse me, can you say that again? It's almost hard to imagine. But I've been very lucky because my job has sort of transformed quite radically over those years. When I started, I was Larry Silverstein's public relations guy, and my job was mostly to work with earned media. And at the time, these were, beat reporters for daily newspapers, television producers, radio producers, and that was it. And then over the years, that work grew to, digital storytelling, social media storytelling, filmmaking, photography, art, like we talked a little bit about earlier. And then I hired a team and I had an event manager, and we started hosting events in our buildings as a way to showcase the buildings and give back to the community. And then we hired, a marketing executive to create all of the leasing and marketing materials, the campaign materials for the buildings. So I was very lucky in that I got to build out this team of extraordinarily talented people to do a whole variety of different things. And everything changed. The technology changed. It advanced. The way we told the story changed. The team grew. We're all working with a singular sense of mission, and obviously a lot of passion and a lot of heart. One of the benefits of working at a family company, and you and I have talked about this a lot, is we're family, and a lot of family companies, you really do get that vibe, and you definitely get it with someone like Larry Silverstein and his daughter Lisa and his son Roger. We do big, complicated projects. We do them very creatively, but at the end of the day, we're family. So we know each other very well, and we live with each other every day. And we're actually, we're a smaller team than I think people think. So I tell a lot of young people, it's never a straight path. Whatever catches your interest, whatever you find yourself really good at, and if you love it, you'll figure out a way to, weave that into your career. You'll figure out a way to make money from that, and regardless of what you do. But, go with the flow a little bit and take advantage of any opportunity that comes your way. If I had been stuck on this sort of idea at the very beginning of my career of working in public relations for a movie studio, I'd probably still be working there, waiting for that promotion to the top spot. But instead, I've been able to craft a career that sort of grew as media grew as storytelling grew, as the internet grew, as social media grew. We found ways to tell our stories through all these new ways of communicating. But at the end of the day, as I said at the beginning, we're all storytellers, and that's what it all comes down to. So, with young people and with young students, my first task is tell your story. Think about who you are. What was your journey to this point? And what are the things that you love to do? And then see if you can figure out and get a path from A to Z. And, I'm sure you see this all the time in your career. It's astonishingly gratifying to see young people or any person follow that path. And even better is when they achieve success and happiness from it. It's just the best thing in the world, right?
Yes, I agree. And I think you see people most likely to experience the success and the happiness, not when they're like following their bliss in a in kind of this newfangled way, but in the way that you're like, what are you good at? What do you like to do? And try to, like, you made this job specifically your own. If somebody were to try to put together a job description, they couldn't replicate you, right? Like it is the job, it is Dara, period, full stop. And I think that the happiest people in their careers seem like they are capable of doing that. So maybe that's being a storyteller, maybe it's being in the right place, but
Yeah.
that's
And working with the right people, it's like at the end of the day, that's what it always comes down to. Is this a good team? Are these good people? Can I motivate them? Can I encourage them? Can I make them look good? Those are the cool parts of the job.
I love that. Well, speaking of the cool parts of the job, you're about to get a little bit hot because you have entered the hot seat.
All right.
I have faith in you, though. I think you could do it. So start you out with something easy, which is, do you have any book or podcast recommendations? Anything you're reading?
I do. Let me grab two books. Hold on.
I love that.
So 2 books that I'm reading. This is Pete Hamill, famous New York journalist with the Daily News, and this is a book called Forever, and it's a fictional story based on the geography and history of Manhattan. It follows an Irish immigrant in the 18th century who travels to New York to sort of escape a miserable life and chase fame and fortune, and then through a whole series of circumstances finds out that he cannot die. So he lives through the entire evolution of New York City from that time to mostly present day. And it's just a really, really cool story because Pete tells the story of the evolution of the city and different neighborhoods within the city. So it's a very, very cool book. I read it when I first moved to New York and I'm just rereading it now. And it's interesting to reread it after living in the city and experiencing a lot of these neighborhoods. Because when I first read it, it was like, oh yeah, I've heard of that place. And that makes a lot of sense, but I've never been there. And now after all of this time, I'm rediscovering places, finding new places, and also getting ideas of places to visit. So that would be my book recommendation for anyone who loves New York City.
That sounds like a great book. I'm going to read it.
It's called Pete Hamill, Hamill, and the book is called Forever.
All right. What's number 2 on your list there?
So number 2 is another book that I'm really enjoying. Actually, it's I get a lot of architecture and design books, because I love architecture and design, but I also love books. And the one that I'm reading at the moment is an interesting one. It's called Escapology, and it's a book about cabins and spaces that are, remote or designed to feel as if they're remote. So it's all about escaping from everyday life. And it could be a shed, a basement, an attic, a porch, or, a really beautiful lake house, or a ski chalet or whatever it is. But it's a lot of fun because, the common thread is not just distancing yourself from the rest of the world, but creating a place for community. It's not about being alone. It's about being with the people you love in a really interesting and unusual space and allowing time for that. So that's the other one that I'm reading at the moment.
I have a lot of reading to do now.
So do I.
So I find a lot of people who are successful have kind of a routine that they've created. Do you have something rituals, routines, things that you do to help you escape the stress, help you get through the day? Do you wake up at a certain time? What do you do to ground yourself?
I do. It's funny. I'm definitely on the OCD spectrum, so I have a lot of routines. Nothing crazy, but I wake up. I live in Lower Manhattan, 5 minutes from where I work. So I wake up at 6:00 in the morning, and at 6:15, I'm taking our dog Tulip for a walk around the neighborhood for an hour. And it's interesting because I walk her in the morning, and then I also walk her in the evening when I come home from work. And I love it because for me, it's an opportunity to sort of wake up, get some fresh air, a little bit of exercise, clear the head, get ready for the day. And in the evening, it's an opportunity to sort of decompress. Some people do this, through their commute. And that's a nice time to sort of separate work from home. And for me, it's, these wanders around the neighborhood. But it's interesting because in the morning, I'm full of energy and I'm the one walking the dog. And in the evening, it's always Tulip walking me. So it's during the evening.
We got this.
Yes, exactly. So in the morning, I've got okay, now I'm going down to the Battery, or we're going to the west side, or we're going to the east side. And that's just where we're going. is whatever catches my fancy. But in the evening, it's like I'm literally going wherever this dog takes me to go. I got a million things going on in my mind. I'm getting ready for the end of the day. And that's when I discover all of these streets and alleys and parks that I didn't even know existed in the neighborhood, that have been there for 400 years. And it's all because Tulip is guiding me around, my neighborhood where I live and work. So those are my two main routines during the day, at the very beginning and at the very end.
What kind of dog is Tulip?
She's a beautiful dog. She's a husky mix. She was a rescue, and we got her from the ACS in Queens about a year ago. So she's half husky, and then the other half is a whole mix. She's a really beautiful dog. And it was funny, last summer, my partner, Emily, was having lunch with a friend of hers at Le Pain Quotidien, a little Belgian cafe in Lower Manhattan. And she was approached.
If you didn't study in Europe, you wouldn't be able to say it like that. If I try to say it, it wouldn't
There you go. I can go in there and order a pain au chocolat quite easily.
Exactly.
So Emily, she was approached by this guy who was an influencer, a guy called the Doggist. And he started asking her all these questions about Tulip. And Emily was quite funny because she said, well, my partner really wanted a dog. And when I met him, he actually had these dog beds and dog bowls, but there was no dog, which I thought was really weird. But we got a dog, and I'm not really a dog person, but, I love this dog. And, she was very charismatic and really told the story of Tulip. And all of a sudden, this video got like 1 million views. So now every time I walk Tulip around the neighborhood, people are coming up, is that Tulip the husky? Is that Tulip the husky? And I'm like, that's awesome. But, this is what I do during the day. And like, I gotta represent and promote this dog now in my 2 hours outside in the morning and evening. So,
you have to get Tulip like a hat and glasses. Like
I know, exactly. Give her a celebrity disguise.
I love that. Well, last question. None of us do this alone. Obviously, it takes a village. Are there any mentors or people that you've spent time with that you think you'd like to kind of give a shout out to, and that are kind of part of the DNA of who you are?
I love that question, and I there are, and I hope that applies to everyone you talk to, because life is so much easier and richer and more fulfilling when there are people that you can talk to and bounce ideas off and look up to, and sometimes follow in their footsteps, sometimes look for guidance. My most important mentor was my dad, who lives in Ireland with my mum. They've been married for over 50 years, which is astonishing for anyone, I think. My dad, for most of my life, was a businessman. He ran companies, and as I said earlier, we lived in Belgium, and that's how I saw him. That's who he was to me when I was a teenager growing up. He actually retired quite early, and the family moved back to Ireland. I came here to America, and my dad became a playwright and an actor and a producer of plays. And I didn't know this, but this was always his first love. This was his passion. It's what he did in high school and what he did in college and, did in his spare time. And now he had this opportunity to do it, but not to need to do it. He wasn't like a young actor who needed to act to pay the rent. He was doing it because he loved to do it. And it was amazing for me to see, this sort of new version of him and be so creative and so interesting and work with such interesting and unusual and creative people. But he did it with, his sort of management hat on. He had managed businesses, he had managed people, he had made money for companies. And he was able to bring that into the sort of a little bit eccentric world of drama and acting. And he loved every minute of it. And it was so cool to see. So in many respects, he was almost like my first mentor or my first guide, because that's a lot of what I do in my work and in my day-to-day life. I think, the other person who's been an astonishing mentor, obviously, has been Larry Silverstein, who took a chance on me, the young kid who didn't know anything about anything, and then took a chance on everyone else by opening the doors to all of these creative people and inviting them in to be part of this incredible project. And then to continue doing it, whether it was in Los Angeles or Philadelphia or in other places around the country, to sort of keep that going was hugely inspirational and continues to be to this day. I was also very fortunate to work for Jano Lieber for 14 years. Jano is absolutely brilliant. He was in many respects Larry's right-hand guy for the beginning and the bulk of the rebuilding of the World Trade Center. And for the last couple of years, he's been the chairman and CEO of the MTA. I mean, think about a complicated job. I mean, like seriously, in the world of work, you'd be hard pressed to find a harder job than that, right?
Yes.
And he's been doing it brilliantly, and he was an absolute inspiration to work for, and I learned a huge amount from him. So I'm super grateful. But I think, and it may sound a little odd, a lot of the people who have my back and a lot of the people who I rely on are the members of my team. So it's not sort of like a senior junior sort of mentorship relationship, but it's and it's not really peer to peer either. But these are all the people who mean the most to me and who I've learned the most from. I learn more from our summer interns than I do from people I've worked with for 25 years, and that to me is really, really cool. And it's something it's something I tell young people, and I do tell the internship class. We do a great virtual internship program every year, and whether it's interns or students, I say, you are bringing something absolutely unique to me and to my organization or to wherever you are working. Nobody has the perspective you have. And whatever you can tell me about me and whatever you can tell me about your impression of us and what we're doing, that is hugely valuable to me because I don't get that anywhere else. We've all been doing it for too long. We know each other too well. You're the person who can come in with fresh eyes, fresh perspective, take advantage of that. And I welcome that. So it's interesting. It's sometimes people you don't even know so well who can be really helpful to the work that you do, helpful in your career, help you sort of extend and expand on your interests. It's a little bit of all of those.
That's so beautiful. Well, Dara McQuillan, it's been amazing to have you as a guest. You exceeded all expectations, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for listening to Beyond the Resume, a Jackson Lucas podcast where we take a deep dive into the career journeys of some of the top minds in real estate and equip you with the knowledge to move forward in your path towards the success you've envisioned. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Beyond the Resume. We're grateful for your support. All episodes of Beyond the Resume are brought to you by Jackson Lucas, building inclusive and diverse businesses through talent acquisition. Visit us at jacksonlucas.com.